This happens all the time. If you Google fall through the ice in winter in Alaska, it'll show multiple different examples of hunters mostly driving and not making it home because at the time that they normally would be traveling to subsist, it became unsafe. And so we're not just losing people at that point. We're losing their cultural information, their traditional knowledge. We're losing the future that they had to contribute to the community. We're losing people who hunt for elders. We're losing people who have children.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Maija Katak Lukin. Maija served as mayor of Kotzebue in 2015 when President Barack Obama visited. She later became superintendent of the Western Arctic National Parklands. She is now the Native Relations Program Manager for the same organization. Today, we discuss her early life, her commitment to the Inupiaq language, climate change's tangible impacts on the Arctic, and more. Maija Katak Lukin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
I grew up in Northwest Alaska between Kotzebue and Sisolak. Kotzebue's right on the northwest coast. When I was a kid, we used to say it's a peninsula on a peninsula on a peninsula. And the Inupiaq word for Kotzebue means peninsula. So it's aptly named Kikikdaruk, but about 12 to 13 miles north on the kind of southern shores of Cape Krusenstern National Monument is our family fish camp, and it's called Sisolak. And I guess if we were talking about traditional place names, right? If anyone from Northwest Alaska hears Sisolak, they understand where that is, and they wouldn't necessarily know where Cape Krusenstern National Monument is, but other people would know that if they're not from up there. So we tend to use both, I guess, descriptors to figure out where we're from.
How many people live in Sisolak?
Currently, 2, I guess. My uncle and aunt live in Sisolak year-round. When I was a kid, it was 50-50. People lived there during the spring, summer, and fall because of the subsistence resources. And then they went back into Kotzebue for the winter. And so we did that. We spent half our year in Kotzebue and half our year in Sisolak. Throughout the last probably 50 years or so, we rely on a cash economy, and in order to that, you have to have a job. So Sisolak has become a weekend place for people. And unfortunately, we moved from Kotzebue and Sisolak about 3 years ago. And so I only spend probably less than a week there a year since we've moved. And obviously, I tell myself every year I'm going to spend more time, but it's just, I have to work. And so it's just difficult to figure out.
Where do you live now?
We live in Wasilla now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask a couple of questions about your parents. My understanding is your dad is Finnish and your mom's Inupiaq. Tell us a little bit about how they met and what their stories were.
My dad's Finnish American. His parents, both of them were in World War II. My late grandparents, and my grandmother was a lieutenant in the Women's Army Corps. And so that kind of moved them around the country and around the world. My grandmother spoke Finnish. My grandfather spoke Finnish, very connected to their Finnish heritage. My dad, I don't know if he speaks Finnish fluently, but he's very Finn. They were moved to Anchorage when he was, I believe, 13 years old, because I remember him telling us that he went to Wendler Junior High School. And so they lived there. My grandmother was one of the founding members of the Women's Democratic Party. There's a award for the legislator named after her. Her real name is M. Hazel Rantala, but the award is the Hazel Johnson Award. And then my dad went to school, and then he ended up in Kotzebue to do construction. So that's where he met my mom. And my mom's from Sisolak and Kotzebue, and she was there. She was working a loader, is what my dad said, offloading from Arctic Lighterage. And he thought, holy cow, there's a woman who knows how to work hard. And I came along after that.
And are you the oldest, I assume?
I am the oldest, and sometimes like to joke around with him that I'm the reason that my sisters are here. because they wanted to stay together for me. I have two younger sisters, Saima and Elsa, and then my mom and dad didn't legally adopt anyone, but we had, I would say, at least five of our first cousins who lived with us for many years when my parents built a house in Kotzebue.
Gotcha. You graduated from high school in Kotzebue?
I did graduate from high school in Kotzebue, yeah.
And then you went to college in the lower 48?
Heck no, I ran away from home and got married to a guy in the Navy from Alaska, and we lived in Orlando, and I had a child.
Oh,
Let's be
wow.
real. I did I get full scholarships to Cornell and choose not to attend? Yes. I can't say that I regret it today because obviously I have a child and have a history and learned from some mistakes that I made. But I actually left and moved to Orlando and got married, had a child, and then realized maybe that wasn't the smartest idea. And then I came back home for a while. And then I went to school full time and was a single parent and went to school at the college in Kotzebue for at least 3 years. And then I went to Eastern Oregon University with my cousin, and I got a child development degree. And then I thought I was going to be a kindergarten teacher, and I worked in a kindergarten classroom for one school year and thought, yeah, this isn't for me.
So, in one of the bios that I read for you, getting ready for this interview, it said that you had hoped on becoming an Inupiaq immersion teacher.
Yes.
So, did you grow up speaking Inupiaq?
So we grew up mostly with our grandparents speaking Inupiaq. And so my mom and dad didn't speak a lot with us, but our grandparents did. And I don't want to say their social circle because that's not a good description of what it was, but the people that were around us all the time because of being in Sisolik were speaking Inupiaq. And so we picked that up. And when I came back with my son and got a divorce, he was like 2 years old, and I was trying to basically fit in I was young when I had him, and I was 19. Was just going to turn 20. So I was 22 and I didn't know what to do with a 2-year-old in Kotzebue. And that part of life is questionable anyway, right? We don't know what we're doing and we kind of wing it. And the tribe was having parent meetings for an immersion school called Nikei. And so that's why I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, basically. And so I worked on the parent governance committee. All my children attended Nikei, and we worked to develop a curriculum together with certified teachers, with para staff, and we used the subsistence seasons rather than the Alaska statute calendar for elementary school, right? And so we used the subsistence seasons, and we taught science by animal tracking, and we taught science by what's the weather like. And so when you go to Nikei, you start at age 3. And that's what I wanted to do. But I also, unfortunately, as a single parent with no child support and no other support, had to have a job that paid more than what an immersion teacher was paying. I did not become an immersion teacher, even though that if I win the lottery, I'm going to do that though. So it's one of those things where you're like,
It's your calling, but you just don't
yeah,
feel like you can make it work.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's my own fault. Like I will take full responsibility that we have too much stuff that we have to pay for now. And yeah, I still speak Inupiaq to my kids as much as I can, right? It's really difficult. I still support Nikei how I can. I do fundraisers for them. My plan is if I win the lottery, then half the money will go to Nikei anyway. It's one of those things that really means the world to me, that there's a place that is saving our language. And we don't have very many fluent Inupiaq speakers. And it's a scary time to think about losing that language. So it's something that I'm super passionate about. And I went into grant writing after that.
And that's what led you to your current position?
No, my current position, I never realistically thought I would be in land management. I worked as a grant writer, I worked in communications, and what brought me over to the current position that I have is I was attending a Inupiaq board meeting, and the board members, there's one from every single community surrounding Kotzebue. And I was actually currently the mayor at the time when this was happening. And when in smaller communities, we still have to have a full-time job, even if we're the mayor. It's not a paid position. It's an advisory position mostly and a decision-making position, but it's not paid. And during the board meeting, a representative from the National Park Service came in and he asked the Inupiaq board what they would like to see in a new superintendent at Western Arctic National Parklands. And everything that they said, I really felt in my soul. They said, we need somebody who understands our way of life. We need somebody who knows what it means when sea ice is going away. We need somebody to understand caribou migrations. We need somebody to understand that when decisions are made in Washington, D.C. that affect us and they don't affect them, it doesn't just affect their food security, it affects their language and their culture and their history and their traditions, and it affects them for generations. And throughout the entire, he was probably there only for about 30 minutes. I deeply in my soul felt like I had to apply for this position. Never thought about it in my life before. It was never an ambition to be in land management. But I understood exactly what they were saying because we lived a very subsistence lifestyle. We lived a very traditional lifestyle. One story about my sister Saima is when we were kids, I'm 5 years older than her, but when she was 9 and our cousin Stacy was 8, they really wanted soda from the Hanson's grocery store, which is 13 miles away from Sisolik, and it's in Kotzebue. And so they hooked up the dogs and they took the dog team all the way to Kotzebue, got their soda, and then came back home. And we were like, oh, you just drove a dog team 13 miles there and 13 miles back just to get a pop, basically, and candy, I guess. But we had this really traditional lifestyle, and I understood what they were saying, and I felt like I could be a bridge. So I applied for the position, and I got the position, and the learning curve was the bureaucracy of the federal government and kind of the authorities that were placed upon the Inupiaq people of Northwest Alaska, and not necessarily with agreement with the tribes. And so my learning curve has always been the government side and not the traditional side.
I want to talk more about the full extent of what you do as a superintendent of the...
I'm not a superintendent anymore. I moved over to the regional office. That's why we moved.
Okay, so what's your title now?
So after I became superintendent, we made some immediate administrative changes with the authorities that I had, which included closing a certain portion of the Inupiaq National Preserve to non-federally qualified subsistence users. Also, I had the authority to work with the state of Alaska to close a corridor of the Inupiaq River. I had the delegated authority for muskox, sheep, and chum salmon. And so I worked with the tribes and their subsistence resource commissions and the rural advisory councils to make some of those changes that I could do immediately. And then one of the things that I did was to help the government understand the way of life of the Indigenous people of Northwest Alaska. And so a position opened up in the regional office as part of the directorate where I could do that for the state. And it was a really difficult decision because we lived in Kotzebue for, my husband and I have been married for 18 years, I think, 17 or 18 years, I can't remember. And so we lived there that entire time. I lived there prior to that. I only realistically left for Orlando and then for Eastern Oregon University. But we sat down and we thought, my parents have retired and moved out to their off-grid homestead past Chickaloon. So they live out here. They need a little bit more help. My sister, my youngest sister was here. And our kids had all left. And so we would be closer to them. And so we ultimately decided that I would apply for the position of the Alaska Native and Tribal Affairs Program Manager for the National Park Service. And so I got that position, and we moved during COVID in 2021.
Gotcha. You weren't able to afford what you needed to afford on that salary, so you had to look for other work. Is that when you went to work for Nana?
Let me think about my timeline. I actually worked for the tribe first, and I think I went to work for Nana.
And what tribe? You went to work for your tribe. What is your tribe?
A Native village of Kotzebue.
Gotcha. Okay.
I know that there was 1 month in my life that I got married, got a job that paid like $30,000 more than I was making, and we bought a house. And that was in one single month that happened. And I was telling my husband, like, the only other thing that could have happened is we could have had another kid in this month, and then it would have been like a
full tsunami. But yes, your life completely transformed in that 1 month. And I think this is true, that especially in Anchorage, a lot of my listeners, I think we're afraid to ask questions about what a tribal corporation is and what it does. So for those of us who are afraid to ask that question, can you talk about what the difference is between working for a tribe and working for a regional corporation, and what the regional corporation does and what it means in that region of the state, in Kotzebue?
Yes. And I think the first thing I said was, I work for a tribe. Which tribe? Native village of Kotzebue. And you said, sometimes we're afraid of asking what it's like working for a tribal corporation. There's a very distinct difference between a corporation and a tribal government. There's 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska, and those are the tribal governments. And most of them are called village name IRA. Indian Reorganization Act. So most of them are called that still to this day because they were established under that act. And so working for the tribe is a nonprofit entity that looks out for its tribal members and its community members, realistically. Just because you live in Kotzebue, and if you're not a tribal member, it doesn't matter to the tribe because it's a collective community. And so they look out for the entire community. So like, for example, at Nikechot, everyone is invited to apply for Nikechot, and everyone who's willing to make the effort to speak Inupiaq at home is enrolled into Nikechot. And working for a tribe is very community-based, and the funding mechanisms for a tribe are very different. There's a lot of federal funding that comes with being a federally recognized tribe, but there's also grants that supplement that, and other opportunities that tribes can take part in. But realistically, when you're in a place like Kotzebue, which is a bigger village, a bigger community, the capacity is not, like being in Anchorage. The working pool isn't as large. And so you have to make decisions on what's most important to run, what programs are most important to run. And so they make those decisions at the tribal council level. So so that's a tribe, right? Tribal government. Now there's corporations, and corporations are considered tribal under the federal government. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act established village corporations in each of the federally recognized tribes. I think there was 230 at first or something like that. And then there was the regional corporations. And so the village corporations are smaller, but they have the same opportunity as the regional corporations, but they have less land. And then they only, quote unquote, own the surface rights of that land that they claimed under INCSA, right? And then the regional corporations have the subsurface of all the village corporation lands. And so corporations, village and regional corporations, are for profit. And they are realistically not community-based. They are shareholder-based. And if you are a shareholder, they will serve you. If you are a descendant of a shareholder, they will serve you. If you are a community member, generally speaking, they're not going to serve you because they are not community-based. They are shareholder-based and profit-based. Now, that's not saying that they don't look into the culture and have cultural programming and they have community-based activities, but realistically speaking, they're shareholder-based and they're for-profit, and their bottom line interest is making money for their shareholders. Tribal governments are sovereign governments under the federal government, right? They're independent nations under the federal government. Their bottom line is ensuring the health of a community in their tribal area. Most tribes in Alaska don't own land, and so they just have a tribal area and tribal members. And then all tribes, because they're sovereign, they can make their own laws on who can and cannot be a tribal member. And so there are some restrictions under the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. You can have a tribal member who's non-native, but they can't have a certificate of Indian blood that says that they have any Indian blood. They can have a certificate of Indian blood, but it'll say 00 on it. But they can decide who and who is not a tribal member. And so shareholders under INCSA, there's a couple of corporations currently. I know Chugayung Tribe in Dillingham, Alaska is a regional corporation. They don't require a blood quantum, but at the time INCSA was passed, there was a blood quantum requirement of a quarter native of any Alaska natives. There's just a difference of kind of what the bottom line is. They could have a very similar mission, they could have a very similar vision, but the bottom line is profit and nonprofit and community-based and shareholder-based.
I apologize for conflating the two. So correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understood from what you said, that the tribal government basically cares about everyone living on their tribal area. Whether you're a member of the tribe or not, if you live within this area, that's their domain and that's their concern. The corporation is concerned with its shareholders, many of whom may not actually live in that tribal area. So you have shareholders of a corporation who basically participate in the corporation government, and then you have the tribal government, which is more directly connected to this specific place and time.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct. And I don't want to upset people who work for village corporations or regional corporations by saying that they don't care about the communities, but because they care about the communities. But when you look at it in black and white, it's very shareholder based and community based. And so I would say that is an accurate reflection of kind of what tribes and tribal governments look for, and then what corporations look for and take care of. And during COVID, a lot of tribes got funding from the CARES Act. And here's an example of Kotzebue. And we were there for COVID. And my husband is a first responder. And so he was there day in and day out. So the native village of Kotzebue, which is the tribe of Kotzebue, when they got their CARES Act funding, they purchased cleaning kits and gloves and masks and Lysol and bleach and all of these things that were needed during the time to, I don't want to say keep clean because that seems like it was dirty, but stop the spread of germs, right? Every single community, every single home and house in Kotzebue got that. It didn't matter whether you were a tribal member or not. Every single community family got one of those boxes, and anyone could call the tribe at any time and say, hey, we ran out of gloves. Hey, can we have some more masks? Hey, we don't have any more Lysol. And there's obviously nothing in Kotzebue at the grocery stores. And they would drop those off immediately. NANA Regional Corporation gave each shareholder a check so we could do what we needed to do with that check. And so my husband is not a shareholder. He didn't get a check. 2 of my children are not shareholders. They didn't get a check. But 2 of my children are shareholders and they got a check. And so it was very shareholder based versus community based. And the reason that they didn't get a check is because my husband has children and I have children and then we have children.
Gotcha. So your husband's the children. So basically, if they don't have the right blood quantum, they're not going to get a check.
Yes, if they're not shareholders, they did not get a check for the CARES Act.
So even if they were raised in your house with you, if they weren't birthed by you, they're not shareholders.
Yes.
Got it. And that's actually really interesting to see how the two operated differently. And I think you worked for NANA,
yes,
as well as the Kotzebue tribe. So you've had like insider experience in both organizations.
Yes, and I teach the difference between tribes and corporations also to federal employees, because it's important to understand our trust responsibility and where it lies within tribal governments and within corporations. And that's just, there's black and white, right? Like we were talking about. Right. And then there's everything else. And 10% of it is black and white and 90% of it is everything else. Because NANA's going to take care of its communities, regardless of whether they're shareholders or not. But when it comes down to, we don't know what to do with the CARES money, we're just going to give it to shareholders, then that's where the black and white comes in. That's where that 10% comes in, where 2 of my children got a $2,000 check and 2 of my children did not.
You also worked for Inupiaq, and I guess, can you explain what that is and how that's different than NANA?
Inupiaq Association was, before INCSA passed, it was all called Inupiaq Association. It was called the Northwest Arctic Native Association. And Inupiaq Manpower was what ran the kind of the BIA programming. And so when INCSA passed, NANA became NANA, and it's not an acronym for Northwest Alaska Native Association. It's just NANA Regional Corporation. But that was
NANA Regional Corporation. NANA doesn't stand for Northwest Arctic. Say that again.
It's just the difference between the pre-INCSA and post-INCSA.
So pre-INCSA, it was Northwest Arctic Native Association. Post-INCSA, it's NANA. That's the name.
Yes.
Okay. So back to Inupiaq, which predated that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then Inupiaq Association, or Inupiaq Manpower, became Inupiaq Association, which was the nonprofit. All of the programming that took place that were nonprofit before INCSA stayed with Inupiaq Association. All of the for-profit things that took place before INCSA, NANA Regional Corporation now had, plus they owned land, right? And so Inupiaq stayed doing the BIA 638 compacting. They stayed doing, or it was called Indian Reservation Roads at the time. They stayed doing the social programming and behavioral health and things like that. And they were the quote unquote BIA office. And then after the 96 amendments to the Indian Self-Determination Education Act, Inupiaq took over all the health care from public health services under their self-determination under the Indian Health Service. And so Inupiaq Association has now 3 wings, and that is health services, behavioral health services, and tribal government services. And Inupiaq's board is made up of 1 member from each of the elected tribal governments of each of the villages that it serves. All of the Northwest Arctic region plus Point Hope, because of their proximity to Kotzebue. It's closer than it is to Inupiaq. And the Inupiaq board is made up of a member from each of the elected tribal groups. And so by resolution from the tribes, Inupiaq Association can consult with the federal government and run government programming like the Indian Health Service for these federally recognized tribes. And there are many other consortia like that across the state of Alaska.
That's so interesting. So that definitely blurs the line. If you think about the regional corporation being over here and the tribal government being over here, and Inupiaq is a nonprofit wing, and correct me if I'm wrong, a nonprofit wing of the regional corporation. However, it's made up by members of the tribal government.
It's completely separate from the regional corporation.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, so they're completely.
They have nothing to do with each other. The way people always say it to me is they're like, the nonprofit is Inupiaq and the for-profit is NANA. The nonprofit is Kowarek and the for-profit is Bering Strait Regional Corporation.
So that is the correct way to say it, but that doesn't mean that they are together.
Got it. Okay.
They serve the same people in the same region, but there is a nonprofit place, and that's Inupiaq, Kowarek, Tanana Chiefs Conference. Like those, and then there is a for-profit.
Where does the money that funds the nonprofit come from?
Health services for Kowarek doesn't run its health service. Norton Sound Health Corporation does. But for Inupiaq Association, the health services comes from Indian Health Service, and they negotiate every year on their compact, and they compact because they're under self-determination using the Indian Self-Determination Education Act, and they negotiate every year how much money it's going to take to serve their community members, their beneficiaries. Realistically, at South Central, they're called customer owners because they are customers and they are owners. So at Inupiaq, they're called beneficiaries, and so it is a compact or a negotiation with the federal government, Indian Health Service, to figure out how much per year it'll cost. And they, under self-determination, can say, this is what we're going to provide, and here's how much it's going to cost. And the federal government says either okay or give me a little bit more information. And They provide that service. And so whatever the Indian Health Service would have been providing, Manilik provides. It's one of the best examples of exercising tribal sovereignty in the nation is the way that the Indian Health Service is run in Alaska, and that the kind of the quote unquote parent corporation is the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortia. And so that is made up of each of those health consortiums that are made up of tribes. And THC has a member from Manilik, they have a member from Norton Sound Health, they have a member from TCC, etc. And so that funding for health services comes from Indian Health Service. The funding from tribal government services at Manilik comes from tribal, either BIA 638 compacting. When I was there, I did the EPA grant for each of the IGAP, Indian General Assistance Program grant for each of the villages at $250,000 a year per village, plus $500,000 a year for Manilik Association. And then they also have, under tribal government services, probate and lands and natural resources. And some of that comes from the general fund. Some of that comes from co-stewardship agreements, the Park Service or with Fish and Wildlife Service or with the BLM. Some of it comes from other projects that they have competed and applied for. Some of it comes from grants. And then their social services their funding comes from social services. So mental health, family services, TANF, tribal assistance for needy families, scholarships, etc.
I am going to get out of this zone because I'm afraid that some of my listeners are like, oh my God.
This could be like great podcasts if you think.
I know.
So we do teach this class to federal employees, and it's at least a couple of hours long because it's very difficult to understand who we have the trust responsibility to consult with. And so unless you're in this work, it's very difficult to understand. And so I totally understand cutting a lot of this information out or using it for other educational information because, realistically, it is very difficult to understand unless you are in this all the time and working in this. And that's just how it is.
When did you decide to run for mayor, and what was that experience like?
I didn't even decide to run for mayor. What happened was our kids didn't really have any place to go besides our home. And that was okay with us, but there were a lot of their friends that just didn't have any place to go play video games or play pool or whatever. When I was growing up, we had the rec center and it was worn down and unsafe for kids to play in. And so it was closed in Kotzebue. And so there was no rec center, youth center, anything like that. And so I went to the city council and said, hey, I have these kids that are, I want to say 8 to 13 or something like that. And they said, find something for them to do then. And I said, that's why I'm coming to the city council, because I really need you to understand that there are funding mechanisms and ways that we can do this. And if you could just add a youth center onto the capital projects that you're lobbying for, it would be wonderful. And I was, honest to goodness, met with like, too bad, find something for your kids to do. And I just was so disappointed because I had all the faith in the world for those members. And one of them said something really snarky. And I literally stood up at a city council meeting and hit the table and said, hey, if you don't do it, I will do it. And I'm going to run for council then. And I walked out, and one of the elders that was on the council that didn't say a lot called me afterwards and asked me to meet him at his house. And I went over and met him at his house, and he said, I want you to run. I'm not going to run for my seat. I'm not going to tell anybody. And I'd like you to run for my seat because I think what you're saying is really important. And I said, if I'm running for the city council, I'm running for the mayor's spot.
Yeah, I didn't. When you were talking, I was like, oh, maybe the way the city government works in Kotzebue is that somebody from the city council becomes the mayor.
Yes, that is how it becomes.
Okay.
But his seat was up.
Gotcha. The mayor's spot was up.
Yes.
Okay.
So I ran for that spot and I won.
What year was that?
I don't remember.
It was before 2016.
Before 2015, because that's when Obama came. I want to say.
So you were the mayor when Obama came?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, Maija, that's so awesome. What was that like?
That's another story that could be a podcast on its own, because I got medevac the day before you came.
You did?
Yes.
But did you make it back? Were you able to greet him?
Yes, I was able to greet him. I ran for the city council spot and I won the spot. And so my very first city council meeting, I said I would like to talk about youth center. I did a community-wide survey and got 979 family responses with like a 95% approval rate of getting a youth center. And I said, here's all the data. Here's every single survey. You can see everybody wrote their names down. Here's the survey monkey.
Yeah, it's like, so you had like a mandate. Everybody wants this.
Every single person wants this. Even people without kids said that they're tired of kids running around at 10 o'clock at night. Like, this was something that the community wanted. And I was met with, you just don't know how it works. Read the ordinances. And I told them I did. I read this entire ordinance book. I know exactly what I read the finances. I know exactly what we can do. In 2012, I believe it was 2012, Kotzebue also opened a liquor store based on a community vote. And only the city of Kotzebue could open the liquor store. So the profit of that was supposed to go back into the community. And I used the verbiage from the vote to say, here's the profit from the liquor store. Here's what it was supposed to fund. And I gave the example of, hey, when my husband and I were going to buy a house, we went to the bank and we said, here's how much money we make. How much money can we borrow? And the bank said, here's how much you could borrow. They gave us some money and we pay it off. Every single month we pay it off. Why can't we do that with the city if there's no capital funding money from anyone? And they said, oh, that doesn't happen. We don't do that. And so what happened was we got the city council meetings on the air so people could hear them. And I asked on the air if anyone supported youth programming. And I asked on the air on record if anyone supports utilizing the liquor store profits to build a youth center. And every single city council member said yes on record. And so we used that information to solicit an RFP, and we borrowed money from Wells Fargo and we built a youth center. And one of the things that happened also at that time was, I think Sarah Palin had just left and Sean Parnell had redline vetoed the Swan Lake Boat Harbor project because it was like $1.4 million. And so once he redline vetoed that, it was halfway through the project. And so we added that onto the request for funding from Wells Fargo. So the youth center and Swan Lake could get fixed. And then also we added like updates to the playgrounds and things like that. And it got approved. And 2 years later, we had a grand opening of the Kotzebue Youth Center, and it's still running there today. And Swan Lake Boat Harbor got fixed, and
that's an amazing story. I feel like there's so many things in so many communities, like where people have been working on them for a decade, and you were able to go from idea through construction to grand opening within like just a couple of years.
I think it was 5 years.
It's still an extraordinarily inspirational story. You were the superintendent of the National Park Service, Western Arctic National Parklands.
Being from Northwest Alaska, my mom is also from there. And my mom's family has been living there and subsisting and utilizing the resources there for 624 generations. We counted back to the first known caribou hunting site 13,800 years ago in Inupiaq National Preserve. And so she's got all of that information and she's passed it down to us. There, especially in Northwest Alaska, where air transportation is extremely expensive and it's a monopoly, right? There's only one scheduled air service in Kotzebue and a couple of charter places. It's difficult. Like you have to rely on being able to utilize a boat or a snow machine to get to places. And so when we think about what does a warming globe or what does a warming sea, what does that do in Northwest Alaska when it feels like it's cold all the time, right? Like it's always 30 below and blowing 30 miles an hour. And you can't stand outside and think, oh, global warming, because it just doesn't feel like that for a lot of the year. But it does feel like that when you think about the danger in going ogre hunting, which is bearded seal, and the danger in driving to the next town in April, when we generally always drove to the next town in April on a snow machine, but people are falling into the rivers. And there are many people in Northwest Alaska who have passed away because they travel on the ice when historically it was a safe time to travel, and it wasn't safe at that time. And unfortunately, that's not an exception anymore. This happens all the time. If you Google fall through the ice in winter or whatever in Alaska, it'll show multiple different examples of hunters mostly driving and not making it home because at the time that they normally would be traveling to subsist, it became unsafe. And so we're not just losing people at that point, we're losing their cultural information, their traditional knowledge. We're losing the future that they had to contribute to the community. We're losing people who hunt for elders. We're losing people who have children. And it creates more trauma than...
Such an important point. Like you lose that life's potential contribution to the community and their potential children that they would have, like all the knowledge that they had. It's so much more than one single life.
And it, like, the pain reverberates throughout all of the communities because I don't want to say we understand the loss because you can't ever understand the loss, but we understand the despair that it feels when you think, how could they go through the ice at that time? Because like we were traveling at that time. And one of the examples that I use is my husband and I's wedding date. We talked to my uncles and my great uncles ad nauseum. We talked to the hunters of our family and said, okay, when are we done caribou hunting? Because I'd like to have anniversaries with this guy together. And he's a big hunter, my husband is, and he's a subsister. I shouldn't call him a hunter. Like he hunts to feed us and other family members. And so we laughed, and my uncles were like, between the first and second week of October, it's freezing up, right? The Inupiaq word for October means it's freezing up. The ice is coming Sitkuvik. And we were like, okay, if we're hunting during Labor Day for the last 50 years at least, that we remember, that my uncle remembers, that my great uncles remember, we're hunting during Labor Day. That's September 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so if we get married October 5, 6, 7, 8, one of those dates, it'll be perfect. And so we got married October 6th. So that's the date that we chose based on the Indigenous knowledge that was given to us, so we could always be together after hunting season. And for 5 years or so, it was great. He went hunting, we came home, we had an anniversary, and then we went on with our life and waited until Thanksgiving. And so 5 years went by, and like year 6, we started hunting like September 25th. And then year 7, 8, 9, we were hunting like October 1st. And it got, hold on, what's going on? And it just got later and later. And now people are hunting until October 20th. Hunting caribou.
That's when the herd is coming through. Like the herd is literally in the area where it's supposed to be that much later.
We're traveling a lot longer distances to get the same caribou that have generally come down for thousands of years during the same time. And it's just weeks and weeks late. The Park Service and the state of Alaska work together to call our caribou, and the Western Arctic caribou herd has, in the last 10 years, just had such a, 1, decline in numbers, but 2, such a late migration through Northwest Alaska that it's difficult you can't plan anymore. Like you can't plan a hunting trip. You can't plan these things anymore because you just don't know when it's going to happen anymore. And when we laughed about, oh, hunting is during Labor Day, it's because it was during Labor Day. It was always during Labor Day. The first week of September, we were done. Middle of September, we were completely done putting caribou away. And now people are getting caribou into November now, which is difficult because they're getting cows because bulls are in rut in November and we don't eat caribou that are in rut. And so it's just a difficult decision to make. And something I want to point out about caribou is we're not getting caribou to feed people. We're not just getting caribou to eat caribou, right? We're not just saying, oh, it's really important to us to have caribou because we want to eat caribou. Yes, that is important. Yes, that feeds our soul. Yes, that's something that we've lived off of for thousands of years. But caribou skin, we put in the bottom of our mukluk so we don't get cold. Caribou sinew is the only thing that you can use to make a waterproof stitch on an umiak so people can go whaling. Caribou butyap, the caribou marrow, is one of the few things that cancer patients digest really easily without getting sick. The language that's associated with caribou, with the science behind how you cut them and where you cut them and which mussels make the best soup, which mussels make the best. I'm trying to think of these words in English, by the way. Which meat makes the best ground meat, which area makes the best roasts, etc. All of these things, using the brain to tan the skin, using the antlers to be able to make ulus and ulu handles and knife handles, and just the language that's associated with all of that, not just the Western science of, hey, this is a heart. And my kids understood what a heart looked like when they were very young, because we were processing caribou hearts and seal hearts and moose hearts, and they knew the chambers of the heart, and they understood those valves went down and went back up, and they understood where an aorta was and why it was so big. And they didn't learn that at school. They learned that because they were processing caribou. And that is all being lost. And so then what happens? We are reliant on the school to teach them biology 101. And we look into a frog heart that was imported thousands of miles with formaldehyde, instead of having our hands in caribou, where we eat the heart. Like, we eat the heart, we eat the stomach, we eat the stomach fat. We use the fat of the caribou to make akutuk. It's not just losing caribou to eat. It's losing the language, it's losing the culture, it's losing the traditional knowledge of how to process it. It's losing all of this social skills that our kids are not going to have if we don't catch a caribou, realistically.
Right. What do you see our priorities should be in terms of what do we do now to try to salvage what we can?
I don't know. I'm one person who tries really hard to make sure that the first thing that I do is listen. I try to listen to Indigenous knowledge holders who maybe have gone through, I don't want to say a famine, but they've gone through periods of, hey, when we didn't eat caribou, we ate fish, and here's how we made sure that we kept the traditions associated with caribou hunting. Or, hey, maybe we're not getting caribou, we're getting moose, and here's something that we can learn from that. I don't know what we do now, except for on black and white, we make safety decisions based on whether it's safe for our kids to go hunting or not. And prior to us moving to Wasilla, I wasn't trying to move to Anchorage, but this position opened up, and it just was something that I feel passionate about doing, and I really love this job. And we did move, but prior to us moving, I didn't know if my grandkids were ever going to be able to hunt ugruk on the ice safely, which means that for 600 generations, from myself to my son to myself, to my mom and dad, to my grandparents, to my great-grandparents on up, they knew exactly how to braid the intestines, and they knew which ice was safe to land on, and they knew where they could go to safely, camp on the ice. And my grandkids will never, ever experience that, which means they're never going to have the language associated with that, which means they're never going to have the Indigenous knowledge associated with any of that. And I can't do anything about it. And so when people ask me, what do we do now? I just don't know. I feel like using modern tools helps. I ask people all the time, hey, you have an iPhone, can you just video what you're doing? And maybe my grandkids can watch that.
In terms of federal policy and in terms of stopping climate change, how important is that?
I guess the first question we have to ask ourselves is, can we stop climate change? And I think the answer is no. I don't think we can stop climate change. I think we can slow it. I think we can work on ourselves and our personal responsibility. We can make better decisions ourselves personally. But in terms of stopping climate change, until we stop our reliance on certain things that are contributing to climate change, it's not going to be stopped. So like the textile industry, I think is the largest contributor to climate change because of fast fashion, right? And are we all going to stop purchasing fast fashion? And the answer is no. Am I going to? Yeah. Is my family going to? Yeah. But are we all going to stop doing that? No. And I don't want to say, yeah, and it's their fault, because I also was a single parent living on a very limited income. And I understand having to shop at Walmart. I do. I understand making the decision of, should I buy this $2 shirt or should I buy this $30 wool shirt? And the $2 shirt is my only choice. And I understand all of the things associated with making those difficult decisions, which is why I think that it's unfair to say, oh, everyone who purchases fast fashion is to blame, because maybe they're not in that circumstance because of their own choices. Maybe something happened. And I think that we collectively just have to work together on policies that support people who have to make those hard decisions. And we have to work on policies that support utilizing newer tools to protect certain things like language. We're all so interconnected with everything. You can't just say, we're going to stop climate change by switching over to electric, because we still need so many imported things for an electric battery. That's just scratching the surface, right?
And we're getting so much of our electricity from burning fossil fuels.
I was going to say, especially in rural Alaska, spend so much money on stove oil and fossil fuels just to keep warm and just to create energy to plug in an electric car. And if you have that opportunity and you live in a place that you can have solar, that's awesome. I hope that people who have that opportunity can utilize that opportunity. But I also think it's socioeconomic to say everyone should buy this.
It's easier for rich people to make green choices.
Yes. And I think we made the decision to buy a hybrid vehicle for myself. But when I was going to purchase my dream car for $40,000 or a hybrid for $47,000, we chose the $47,000 vehicle because we could afford it. And can everyone afford that? That's not affordable. A $1,500 30-year-old diesel truck is really affordable for people. And if that's their situation, then I'm not going to be the person that says, oh gosh, why are you using this? I think it's really unfair that sometimes we think that way. Going back to what do we do now? I don't know. I don't know what we do. I don't know if we can do anything. Asking other people who may have lived a certain way prior to us, have that knowledge. Maybe they have an insight that we haven't thought about because we're over here scratching the surface. My parents live off grid completely. So they have no running water. They haul water. We haul their water. We chop their wood. But are they getting wood delivered from somebody? Yeah, he's using a diesel truck to deliver their wood. My dad uses a generator to watch hockey if solar's not working well enough. And some people, they don't want to live like that. And I don't blame them. Yeah, I don't know what we can do. I think we put people who are much smarter than me together, and maybe they offer some insights of things. I do think there's one thing that's been really heavy on my heart since living in Wasilla, which, the valley is very farmland friendly, right? It was incorporated by homesteaders and by farmers, and the choice that we make to purchase from a local farmer or purchase from Walmart, those are choices that I can make. And some people don't have that choice. And so if I'm choosing to buy a quarter of a cow and process it myself, that's because I already bought processing equipment. That's because I already have these things. And that's because I already have the knowledge to do it, right? And I do think that while there is an opportunity to be a better locavore and to buy small business, when I buy bread, it's from a lady who bakes sourdough. It's not at the grocery store a white bread from, I don't know, Kansas. I don't know where white bread comes from. But it's a loaf of sourdough that, do I know whether she imported her flour? I don't know, but I'm helping her family. I feel like I'm helping pay for 1/10 of her kids' gymnastic lesson. I don't know. And I just think that if we all, to our best ability and to our best financial ability, to support local food and local gifts and things like that, that might help just a little bit.
We're recording this 2 days after the election. I don't know if you have any thoughts that you'd be willing to share about what you think the next 4 years will be like regarding this issue or not.
I don't know what the new administration is going to say, and I don't know what the plans are. It's only been a couple of days. I've worked under the previous Trump administration. I worked under this administration, and there's black and white things that are taking place up here, and those things are like safety, right? There's safety issues when we talk about allowing employees to travel to smaller communities via snow machine. It's a safety issue. It's yes or no. Is it safe or is it not safe? And we're going to use the safe option. And I spent the first 3 years of my superintendency talking about the changes that are taking place in Northwest Alaska under the Trump administration. There are things that I agree with in that administration, and there are policies that were put into place that help Indigenous people in Alaska, and there are things that we can work together on no matter who's in office. It's always difficult and always scary when change is coming, right? No matter what change it is, it's difficult. My husband and I moving to Wasilla was difficult. Even though it was a good thing, I got a raise, I got a promotion, all of these things. It was so difficult and it was so scary. And so I understand people feeling that way right now. But I also think that it's really important to think about the positive things that are coming through, that could come through. And I have concerns, obviously, about whether we're going to be able to have conversations about the reduction in caribou herd, the social feel of all of that. But everybody makes decisions. And when I want to change those decisions, I do things like quit my job and run for office. Because those are the people that are making those decisions, and that's who we have to work with. And that's just the democratic process that we have. And I'm just one single person, and one person who interprets certain direction in certain ways. And I'm going to continue to interpret direction in the way that helps Alaskans and Indigenous communities.
Maija Lukin, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
You're welcome. I appreciate it, and thank you for reaching out to me.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@ahileg.gov or call my office at 907-269-0123.